You're listening to the Study Podcast with Dr. Paul Wegner on the Old Testament historical books. I'm your host, Tyler Sanders. I'm here with Dr. Paul Wegner. He's going to give us the Hebrew word of the day.
Oh, you know what? Before I do that, I'm going to give you some background, if that's all right.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, we're in the book of Esther, and I've entitled it "Demonstrating Faith in Dangerous Times." So what I wanted to do is I wanted to give a little perspective of what's going on.
Okay.
So remember, we're post-exilic now, so we're after the Israelites have come back, but remember, not all of them have come back. Some of them are still in these foreign lands, and Esther's going to be one of them. She's living in the Persian Empire. Mm-hmm. In the Persian Empire, now at some points, the Persian Empire was extremely lenient and allowed them to do their own worship and stuff like that. So and remember, even Cyrus himself sent that decree that they were to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem and pray to their God for him. So he's, like I had said, he's a really good pagan. He wants all gods, as many gods as possible on his side. Hmm. But we're at a time when, for some reason, the Jews are Haman. We know Haman and Mordecai have this issue, and Mordecai. We'll talk about that later. What's going on there? But for sure, Haman is really upset with Mordecai, and so what he does is he puts out a decree to have all these Jewish people killed, and so this is the situation we're in. So we're in a foreign land. Many Jews are still in this foreign land. There's some back in Jerusalem and in Judah area, but not as many probably as living in the other areas. Okay, so we're in a situation where Esther has to stand up for her people, or God's going to have to find some other way to protect them, because in actual fact, it's going to be a real dangerous situation for them very shortly. So that's kind of the background I wanted you to have before I got into the
Hebrew word.
All right. Well, I should show you that. Yeah, this.
Oh yeah, you got a visual.
Yeah. This is Darius's palace in Persepolis. There were like three capitals for the Persian Empire. And remember, last time we talked about Susa. That was one of them. This is another one of them. And these were like palaces, and we even think that one in Susa was more like almost a fortress kind of thing. Yeah. Anyway, so this is one there. And I wanted you to see this picture over here on the side comes from down on that staircase there. So you can see kind of what it looks like. Yeah. So I thought that's kind of fun. All right.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah.
All right, let's get to our Hebrew word. And again, I've got two of them for you, because I thought this first one might not be as exciting as we need.
Okay.
Okay. Here's the word. It's the word nobles. It's the one here in red. And it's the reason I even bring this up is it's a Persian loan word. And we know that because it has four root radicals. Remember, we've talked about Hebrew always having three, and if they have different than that, they're probably a foreign word. That's probably what this is. This is probably a foreign word that's now been brought into the Hebrew language. And it'd be like us, taco or pizza or something that we get so familiar with that we just use the word and just become like our word. Okay.
Yeah, so this is a word that's integrated in, basically. This isn't necessarily just like an outside word or something that refers to something only outside. This probably gets integrated in and has meaning for the Hebrew people.
Yeah, that's probably true, though I don't know that for sure, because it's the word noble. So that's probably a very specialized vocabulary for these people. So whether it became commonly used in Israel, I'm not sure of that. Yeah. One other thing.
This kind of refers specifically to the Persian nobles.
Yes. Yeah. It seems to.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And
it's like a title that. Yeah.
One other interesting thing. It's also found in Daniel, chapter 1, verse 3. So I thought, well, that tells you that. Remember, because Daniel is living in the Persian Empire for a while too. And so, so it's interesting. It's in that book too. You're probably going to ask me how to pronounce it, right?
I know.
All right. This one's interesting because it's got an article on it. So it's talking about the nobles, and that's Hup Ra Tamim. Hup Patarim. All right. Or Partarim. I'm sorry. Hup Partarim.
Yeah.
So that's our word for nobles. And as far as I know, it doesn't occur normally in Israel because we don't see it in a lot of other books. We just see them after the Persian Empire takes over. Okay, I thought, that's an interesting one. But
that is interesting.
Here's our next one. In Esther especially, there's actually the word gallows. And remember, Haman gets hung on his own gallows that he makes. What's interesting is that it's the word for great tree. It's the word eitz, which probably means wood or tree or something like that. So this, and then it has the word great behind it. Gaoba. Wait, Gaboa. I'll get it. Gaboa. And basically that word, Gaboa, means great, and they are high tree. And the other one is the word for wood or tree. And I assume in this case it's more like wood, high wood.
Substance.
And then later it's used in that same verse in Esther 5:14, used at the end with an article on it. So that I thought was kind of interesting. It's just talking about wood, and I guess that wood could be shaped in anything that they wanted to shape it in. In this case, it's shaped like a gallows.
Well, and the rest of the verse really tells us how it's going to be used.
Here, in fact, let me read it. Sorry about that. When Jeresh, his wife, and all his friends said to him, "Have a gallows," literally high tree or high wood, 50 feet high. That's 7.5 story building.
Wow.
So, that's even higher than the seminary down there in California.
Yeah.
So it's 7.5. So he's purposely doing that to make sure everybody sees it. So this is more like an humiliation kind of thing also. Anyway, all right. So, and in the morning, ask the king to have Mordecai hung on it or hanged on it. They all go joyfully to the king to the banquet, and then go joyfully with the king to the banquet. And pleased Haman, so he made the gallows, or the tree, and he built it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so I thought that one's really exciting because I guess that wood could have been shaped in anything, So I've got an actual picture here of what the Babylonians did. They put the stake right through people. So I'm not sure exactly how this gallows worked, but it somehow would have been holding him up there, and I don't know if he'd be hung or stuck through him, which is kind of disgusting.
I see. Yeah. I mean, both pretty terrible. Okay. Basically, the important point is that they're on display, essentially, in their death. Right?
Okay, does that one make some sense? Now that one's good too, huh? All right. Okay. What I wanted to do is show you what my structure of the book is. Right in the heart of it, in chapter 6, you've got the king not being able to sleep, so he gets the books of the history out. In that time period, he finds out that Mordecai had saved the life of the king, and he had never been compensated for that. That would be a real no-no, because if a person's put their life in danger of, because if the people found out that he was the one that told, they could have killed him. So he did that, and if he doesn't get compensated, the idea is, well, then why would other people do it? Because they're putting their own life in danger for no reason at all, and the king doesn't seem to even care.
Right.
So that seems to be the pinnacle of this book, because everything before it talks about the Jews being in great danger, and just keeps getting worse and worse as the book goes on. Then you get to chapter 6, and all of a sudden now events change, and starting at chapter 7, you've got the Jews being delivered or victory for them. So it's really, this book is kind of built off chapter 6, and everything builds up to it and then comes down from it. So I think it's kind of an interesting book.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
A few other things. They don't know who authored the book, but some people have thought Mordecai. So at least it's possible. The purpose was to demonstrate God's deliverance through a faithful woman in the time of severe persecution. Key verse, I think, is Esther chapter 4, verse 14. If you keep silent, deliverance will come for the Jews from another place. So it's interesting. Even Mordecai thought, there's no way that God's going to allow his people to be wiped out. So, but Esther has a chance here to actually help his people or not be a part of the help. So it's kind of interesting. I think that's kind of crucial to the book.
Yeah.
So, all right, it's in the reign of Ahasuerus, and I put it on the timeline here so you kind of could see where it is. And let's see. Key ideas is God protects his people. There's irony. Do you know what irony is, Tyler?
I do know what irony is. I was an English major, actually. Yeah. And that's fascinating because I think that's probably something that we miss a lot in a lot of books of the Bible, especially the Old Testament.
Yeah.
We probably tend to read them very straight, and not kind of see some of those. Like, I think, Jonah for sure has irony in it. There's lots of things that happen that should, give you that, clue that you're seeing some dramatic irony kind of occurring. But that's really throughout the Bible.
Yeah.
We do miss that a lot.
And Esther has some pretty clear places, like Haman gets ready. He goes to the king thinking that he's victorious and he's going to have Mordecai wiped out. He gets hung on his own gallows that he has made. That's the kind of irony that's through the book. They think one thing and then everything switches for them. So, okay. So that's that. Well, why don't we get into the book? Oh, there's one.
Let's look.
There's one interesting thing that I maybe should mention is that the name Yahweh or the name for God is never mentioned throughout the book.
Right.
And so it's kind of interesting. Here's a book that's in the Bible and God's name isn't even mentioned in it. So we'll talk about that later, but I think it's important to realize I think God's still there. And I mean, things are just amazing for God's people being protected and all that. But he never even has to come out and say that he's the one doing it. He can be in the background and do that. And I have a feeling that's the way God commonly works, right? He commonly is in the background. We don't always see him doing things, but we know he's there doing them. So I think it's kind of neat. And it's kind of different for at least the biblical books.
It's for sure different. Yeah, right.
All right. Let's go to the next one. And here's more of a picture of it, just so you can see that chapter 6 is pretty much the key to the whole book. All right.
Yeah.
All right. The Persian Empire spread throughout the Fertile Crescent, and though they're not really able to control the Greeks, they did keep control of the ancient Near East longer than Assyria and Babylon combined. So we sometimes don't get that idea how long the Persian Empire existed, but it did.
Right.
And Xerxes I was the son of Darius the Great, who was very successful at enlarging the kingdom. But he still stopped by the Greeks at the Battle of Marathon, and I'm sure you've probably heard of that. And and that's the place where the Greeks actually defeated them and stopped the Persian expansion. So, okay, so here's you've got Ezra in 539. You've got Cyrus's decree. Then you've got Ezra's arrival in 458 and his reforms. Then Nehemiah is after that, about 433. And he even has a second governorship that lasts apparently a while also. So something about that. Anyway, so Esther is right in the heart of the time period here.
Yeah.
All right. Key ideas. God's at work even behind the scenes. Sin will be punished. God's plans for his people will succeed. And sometimes God requires that we step out in faith. And that's for sure seen in Esther's life.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. The author might be Mordecai, but we don't know that. The date is clearly during Ahasuerus, or his other name is Xerxes I. So, he's pretty clearly dated 486 to 465. So he had about 20-year reign, and it was pretty good. and it's probably written sometimes after the events. There are no Hebrew manuscripts of this book earlier than the 11th century. And that yeah, that one is surprising. We do have it in the Septuagint, so I'm assuming it's, at least they knew about it, but why we don't have any Hebrew manuscripts is unusual.
Is Septuagint kind of the earliest we probably have?
Yeah, it actually is.
Yeah.
And in the Septuagint, there's about 100 extra verses in the Greek text. Yeah. So it is interesting.
That is.
Do you remember? Darius was having them look for the thing that Cyrus had made, the decree that he'd made that the Israelites could build the temple, and how hard it was to find that. Well, if that's stuff that's their own kings have recorded and stuff like that, to have a Jewish book that's not really, well, it's, it would not be their main literature anyway, and it's in a foreign land. So I guess it's real possible that they just didn't have copies of it early, at least ones that we know, and maybe we still are going to find some, who knows.
Sure.
But at least for now.
Interesting. That's very interesting.
Here, I wanted you to see just how big the Persian Empire was. It went almost all the way over to Athens, all the way over to just about India. And what I thought, well, how long is, how big is that? So I looked, it's about 1,000 miles more than from Los Angeles to New York City. So if you do on that distance, you know how long that takes. Well, their empire was even bigger than that. So I thought that was kind of neat. That helped me to.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. All right. The royal records have not been able to verify Vashti, Esther, Mordecai, or Haman, which is kind of interesting. Because what's interesting is in Esther chapter 10, verse 2, it claims that all the facts can be verified in the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia. The problem is we don't have that book. So, there's other books mentioned in the biblical text that we're not aware of, that we have no idea about them. So, I guess that's part of the things we suffer with, probably because they were written on materials that didn't last. And so weren't
going to last. Yeah.
All right. Purpose. God's miraculous hand is always protecting his people, even when it's not obvious. The wicked will not triumph over the righteous. The skeptical will not see it, but the influence is unmistakable. And I kind of what I think is either Haman had a really bad day, or God's they're making sure that Haman gets his punishment. So, and it seems like to me that it's pretty clear that Haman's getting punished by God. And then here's another part of the structure. It's pretty much what I've shown you already. So. All right. In chapter 1, we've got Ahasuerus' banquet. My guess is it's to demonstrate his wealth. It says that he's got this banquet is for 180 days. So that's like 6 months, right? I mean, it's a long time. And then that was for the nobles and the officials, and then a 7-day banquet for everyone in the citadel. So, probably in the area could come. So, why would a king do that? And I'm assuming it's probably got several reasons. Remember, the Persian Empire is spread out so far that it probably was good to bring all these nobles in and orientate them and make sure they were all on agreement and stuff like that. So that's probably part of it.
They knew who the king was.
Yeah. That's probably part of it. But I assume it was also to demonstrate his wealth. We know the Persian Empire was amazing for gold and, buildings being built. So we know that. And so I assume that's part of another reason why these people would come in. Yeah. Queen Vashti is said to be beautiful, but she refuses to come into the king. Remember when he asked her to come in? And that seems pretty odd. Why would a queen not do that? Some have suggested that she was pregnant at this time with the next Persian king.
So it was dangerous, maybe.
Yeah. The other possibility is that she would have had to appear nude. And if that's true, maybe they working together, that it would be almost like embarrassing to have her be pregnant and then have to appear before these. And it makes it sound like it appears before all the guests. I would have thought that's awful humiliating. So at least that's possible. But at that point, God's plan is beginning, right? When she refuses to come in, that's going to open the door for Esther to become queen. Okay, so it's an embarrassment for the king. All the women would hear. This is what they say. All the women will hear and not obey their husbands. Now, in my mind, that's pretty doubtful. Just because a queen couldn't do it, most of us.
Yeah, now all society is going to collapse.
Yeah, right. I'm thinking most people, just because a queen didn't do it, most people are not going to think they can do it. Yeah. So I think that's doubtful. And it says that all the women will, if they do this, then all the women will honor their husbands. Once again, I doubt that's going to work too. So, so I think this was, it's clearly way over the top kind of language, I think, to give them ideas of making it sound like, well, this is what we've got to do. So, so the king determined that she should never come into his presence again. Now, the Persian Empire was kind of interesting. If you, and we find this from Haman, that if the king didn't extend his scepter to you, then you didn't get to come in and see him. We're going to see that later in Esther's time. So it's very severe to say, okay, if she's not going to come when I call her, she's never going to come in. See, that sounds like me to be pretty severe, but it's basically God's plan starting to work its way out. And so it seems like to me, this is God's hand in it again. All right. Chapter 2 is Queen Esther being chosen, and it goes through all the thing about calling all the most beautiful women from all over the kingdom. Now remember how big that kingdom was too. Yeah. And I've always thought about this and thought, that's really disgusting. If you think about it, that means, because what happens is they come into his harem, they have one night with the king, and then the king never goes into him again unless it's the one he chooses. That means that all those beautiful women that came to him don't get the opportunity to be married to people in their kingdom. And I'm going, how cruel would that be to all the other people in the kingdom also? Their daughters being taken, and then from then on, they wouldn't have families and stuff like that. So it seems really, in my mind, really cruel.
It's very, very lopsided.
It also says that Mordecai is the son of Shimei. Now, I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but Shimei was actually during the time of David, if it's the same one, and it sounds like it is. Let me read a passage from 2 Samuel 16 about him. When King David came to Buriam, behold, there came out from there a man from the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. And he came out cursing continually as he came. He threw stones at David and all the servants of King David, and all the people of all the mighty men were at his right hand and his left. Thus Shimei said, when he cursed, get out, you man of bloodshed and worthless fellow. The Lord has returned on you all the bloodshed of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son, Absalom. And behold, you are taken into your own evil, for you are a man of bloodshed. Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord, the king? Let me go over and cut off his head. And now, later on, he comes back. And at that point, David says, no, leave him alone, because who knows, maybe God told him to do that. When he comes back, Zeruiah, the same guy said, or Abishai, the same guy says, well, now we know this wasn't of God, because God let you come back. So let me go over and cut off his head now. And David says, no, we're not going to do it that. And because, again, nobody's going to die today, because we know that God's favored me. And so it's really interesting. But if he is, then if the reason I even bring this up, if Shimei or Abishai had cut on his head, then you wouldn't have Mordecai 500 years later in that line that comes actually spares his people. So here's God protecting this person that at that point so that he can use an offspring of that person later in life or later in his history.
Yeah.
So I think that is just amazing. And from what I can tell, I mean, it says the son of Shimei, so I'm assuming it's the same guy.
It's referring to the same one. It is a really fast. I mean, I remember when we covered that a few weeks ago, and that was it's such a fascinating example of kind of unearned mercy, you know, like but that's so great to see how that plays out later in the family, you know.
Yeah, so I thought that was amazing. Now remember, Esther is his uncle's daughter. So this is not his own daughter; it's his uncle's daughter. So it's interesting, but that probably means that he is connected in the royal bloodline to Saul. So it is kind of interesting, and how God works things out is kind of amazing. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Esther's chosen to be queen and found favor with this guy named Haggai, the king's eunuch, and told her to take with her. He was the one that told her what to take because he knew the king well enough. Here's what it says. Now, when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abigail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, came to go into the king, she did not request anything except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, told was in charge of the women, advised. And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to the king Ahasuerus to his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the women he found, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Now, that's actually kind of amazing here, because if I was Ahasuerus, there is no reason why he had to make a decision. He could just continue to take every night have a different woman, and he could have done that the rest of his life. There's no reason why he has to choose and make one. So that God chooses, or that King Ahasuerus chooses Esther out of all those women is another kind of amazing thing, and it has to be God's hand behind it, I think.
Right.
So I think that's kind of amazing. And then right after that, in that same chapter, you find out that Mordecai saves the king. He uncovers a plot to kill him. And that's when it says, it makes it real clear that he was not paid for, and that's very unusual. Later, that's going to be crucial to our story. So, okay. All right. And then in chapter 3, we've got this Haman's plot against the Jews. At this point, it's kind of interesting, too, because Haman is called the Agagite. I don't know if you remember, but Agag was a king in 1 Samuel 15 that Saul was supposed to kill, and he doesn't. So I don't know.
Interesting.
I don't know for sure if he's related to him. But if Saul would have done his job that he was supposed to back in David's time, or before David, then we wouldn't have this problem today. So it was interesting. And then later on, no, that's not totally true, because later on, David has somebody kill this king, Samuel has the king get killed. But obviously he must have had offspring that continued on.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned irony earlier.
Yeah.
That's a very good example of it, that here you have all these years later, a descendant of Saul and a descendant of Agag, the king he was supposed to kill, are having conflict again. Yeah. You know, they're opposing each other again.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Here, let me read the passage in 1 Samuel. This is 1 Samuel 15. So Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt. He captured Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and he was not willing to destroy them utterly. But everything despised and worthless they utterly destroyed. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I've made Saul king, for he's turned his back from following me and has not carried out my command. And Samuel was distressed and cried out to the Lord all night. So that's kind of interesting. That's a little of the background of where the Agagites came from. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in chapter 3 talking about Haman plotting against the Jews, and this guy named Haman is related to, is related to the Agagite, or he's said to be an Agagite. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. In chapter 3, you've also got something that I think is really interesting, and I have no idea exactly why he does this. But Mordecai refuses to bow down to Haman. And the reason seems to be in chapter 3, verse 4, it seems like because he's a Jew. But it's not that Jews didn't have any problem of giving honor to the leaders. In fact, God often told them to honor their leaders. So it's not, so I don't know. I don't think that can be why he's refusing to bow down to him. Now, it could be because he thinks he's a jerk and all those kind of things, because he wasn't, he was like the second in command, but he wasn't necessarily a very honorable person necessarily.
Yeah.
So it could be something like that, but I'm not sure why. And I don't think it can be, well, let me read it for you and let you see what it says. So in verses 3 and 4, it says, "Then the king's servants who were in the king's gate said to Mordecai, 'Why are you transgressing the king's command?' Now it was when they had spoken daily to him and he would not listen to them that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's reason would stand. For he told them that he was a Jew." See, that makes it sound like that's the reason. Okay, but I don't think it can be. When Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage to him, Haman was filled with rage, but he was disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him who the people of Mordecai were. So apparently the Jews had a fairly high standing, at least. Therefore, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. Now, again, that seems a little excessive. Why would you kill a whole part of your nation just because one person refuses to bow down? So it seems like, again, this seems like irony to me. It seems like what's going on is this sounds like that Mordecai's way going overboard, but so is Haman going way overboard. So I'm wondering if that's part of the irony here. So,
well, let me ask you this. Would you say this would be different from like what happens in Daniel when, there's refusal to bow down before Nebuchadnezzar? Is that because Nebuchadnezzar is kind of presenting himself as a god or equal to God?
Yes, I think so. And remember that
Haman is just a man.
Yeah. Yeah, but Haman doesn't seem to claim he's a god or anything like that. He clearly is under, the Persian king, and so so it seems like it is different.
So it's a different category. Yeah.
Good point. All right. In chapter 3, Haman pays to do away with the Jews. I'm not sure again why he has to pay money, because it sounds like to me, Haman's got pretty much power to do what he wants almost. So I'm kind of surprised. Not sure he wants to do away with all the Jews. Also, is Mordecai really that powerful? Anyway, they roll a dice, and I've tried to give you some pictures of what dice would look like at that time, but they roll lots basically, and sets the 12th month as the punishment. So this was in the first month, the month of Nisan. It's not until Adar, which is the very last month, so 12 months later, that when it's carried out. So my guess is at this point, God's giving them time to get it all worked out. So, I mean, it could have happened in the same month. I mean, he's in the month of Nisan, and he could have rolled it and it came up to Nisan. Then they wouldn't have had hardly any time to do this decree and protect them. So again, that seems like irony to me, where you expect that it could have happened much sooner, but God gives them extreme amount of time to get everything ready for protection. So it seems at least unusual to me.
Yeah.
All right. Then in chapter 4 and 5, now is when Queen Esther has to decide what she's going to do. Esther finds out about Haman's plot She finds out because Mordecai is out mourning. He hears about it. He's out mourning at the gate, and Esther doesn't seem to know what's going on. So she asks him what's going on, and that's when she was told. It seems like this is kind of interesting. Esther knows she can't go into the king unless she's called for. So in one sense, she's her hands are tied. But because of her position, she could still go in and then see if the king is favorable towards her or not. If he's not, she's dead. As I understand it, that's very possible. So
we've already seen in this narrative severe consequences.
Exactly.
For kind of breaking that social order.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to read to you what Mordecai says. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish." So Mordecai is convinced that God's somehow going to protect his people. It may not be through Esther, but he is going to do it. So I think that's clear. And then and who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. That's kind of the key phrase in the book of Esther. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my maidens will also fast in the same way." Now, as far as I can tell, that fasting is a thorough fast. Remember, Daniel, it said when he fasted, sometimes he would just not eat the royal food. Yeah. So this one seems to be it's showing. I'm assuming it's showing God that they're really serious about this. Yeah. So don't eat or drink for 3 days, and night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way, and thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. See, there's that pretty clear. You can't do it unless you're called for. And if I perish, I perish. So here she is making up her decision that I'll do this because I've got to save my people, but it could cost me my life. And so she makes it real clear, have everyone, pray and fast and stuff like that. And then I guess she's leaving it in God's hands, isn't she?
Right.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Okay. Esther then plans this banquet. So this is the way she decides to do it. And Haman and the king come, and Haman is excited. He's all excited that he gets to come with Queen Esther, and he's the only other one besides the king that she invited. That's got to be stoking his his pride, almost certainly. Yeah. All right. Now, at that point, she doesn't ask the king, and I'm not exactly sure why, but it fits out perfectly in the thing, because it's that very night that the king reads the books and then spares the Jews or spares Mordecai. But it could be she chickens out. I mean, that's always a possibility. She could have chickened out, and God's using that, right? So she doesn't ask it then. She asks it later and all that. But so that's possible. But I think there's a better answer. I think it was to indicate to the king that this was a really, really serious thing that she's going to ask him. So if the first time she gets ready and he knows she has something she wants to ask, but she doesn't do it, except to say, well, let's have another one and then I'll tell you when it is. So I think it must have been that this is to let the king know this is a real serious thing. I'm really dedicated to making sure that you give this to me. Right. And I think that's what it's for, to tell you the truth. So at least it makes sense to me.
It does make sense, yeah.
So in that time period, Haman now is probably emboldened, because he was asked to come in for the thing.
Oh, sure.
So he's emboldened to build the gallows that he's going to use for Mordecai. Esther 5:14 says this. Then Jeresh, his wife, and all his friends said to him, have a gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. They go joyfully with the king to the bank, and then go joyfully to the king with the king to the banquet. And the advice pleased Haman, so that he had the gallows made. Now, at that point, now remember, she at this point, it was the one that gave him the idea. Later on, she's going to also be the one that says, as soon as Mordecai gets honored by the king, the minute that happens, she's the one that says, "Well, man, if this is the beginning of God honoring Mordecai, then you're going to be in trouble." And so here she gives him the idea. When he comes back, she's the one that also tells him, "Man, you better look serious about this because I think you're on the road to getting in trouble."
Right.
So it's funny. Then we talked about if 50 cubits would be 75 feet. And so I wanted to make sure you knew about how tall that was. And so 7.5-story building that's really up there. So
yeah, that's really tall. Yeah.
So I thought, that's helpful. All right. So in chapter 6, the second part of the book is where we have this crisis where the king can't sleep. So the current king learns that Mordecai was to be honored, and yet he hadn't. Okay. Haman then helps plan the honoring. He thinks it's for him. So he actually says, let's have him ride on the king's horse and announce this is what the king does. I'm going, Mordecai could probably care less about that. If I was Mordecai, give me money and stuff like that. What's this honoring and going before me, riding the king's horse and all that? What good's that going to do? But remember, Haman had all the money and honor and stuff he needed. Yeah. So he thought, well, this would be a great way to set me up for the next, being king next.
Right.
So I think that's what is going through his head. And then so it's funny, Haman has to honor the man he hates in the very way that he would have wanted to be honored. Right. So I think, if that's not irony, I think that is,
completely.
Yeah. So that is so funny. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So he walks around on the king's horse, and he's announcing this is what the king does for those he wants to honor. In Esther chapter 6, verse 11, it says, "So Haman took the robe and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city square and proclaimed before him, thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor, who he was wishing was him and is still is the one he hates."
Right. Right.
So you now know poor Haman is started down the road wondering, what is going on?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So Haman then heads home. He's humiliated at this point because remember, he thought everything's going out bad for him. His wife even warns him that Mordecai will win. In verse 6, 12 through 13, he says, "Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Mordecai hurried home, mourning with his head covered." Now, that's also kind of funny. He's mourning when he was supposed to be honoring this guy. Right. Okay. Right. And then Haman recounted to Jeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and Jeresh, his wife, said to him, "If Mordecai before whom you have begun to fall is of Jewish origin, you will not overcome him, but you will surely fall before him." Now, at this point, they know he's of Jewish origin, right? Because that's the whole reason Haman wanted to do that to him. Down. Yeah. If he wasn't of Jewish origin, then the Jews wouldn't have to worry. So they're basically saying, here God's starting to have you fall and you're going down. So, oh man. All right. Okay, so now we're in the third part of the book, and the Jews are being delivered in chapters 7 through 10. Esther has her second banquet, and Esther explains Haman's plan to annihilate the Jews. And God must step in and help the nation, or they'd be wiped out. Verses 3 through 6 says, then Queen Esther replied, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me as my petition, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated." Now, remember up to that point, Mordecai made it real clear, don't tell anybody you're a Jew. And here's a really good reason for that, because now she can. So here, Haman can make this claim. Now he finds out that the queen is one of them that is going to be killed by this. So I think that's part of the reason God's making sure Mordecai doesn't let her tell that she's of Jewish origin.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, if we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have remained silent. Now, that's like when you're talking less than what really was going on. So it makes it sound like, oh, if we were only going to be sold into slavery, I would have kept my mouth shut. Well, that's probably not true either. But it's clearly understating the issue. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. For the trouble would not be commensurate with the annoyance to the king. Then King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, who is he and who is he who has presumed to do this thing? And Esther said, a foe and an enemy is the wicked Haman. Then Haman became terrified before the king and queen. So now the thing that started earlier that day is now being seen. And this probably happened really quickly, right? Because that morning he honors Mordecai. That afternoon, well, noon or whatever time, she's at a banquet with Queen Esther and finds out that Haman is the one. So this now happens fairly quickly. Haman is terrified. He pleads for his life. And remember, he even goes to the queen. The king walks out of the room. It says he's falling on Esther to get her to turn back and not make, to spare his life. Right. The king comes back in. He sees Haman falling all over Esther. He says, well, you're doing this in my own household? So it was interesting. Verses 9 and 10 said, then Harbona, one of the eunuchs who was before the king, said, behold, indeed, the gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. And the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows, which had been prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. So again, beautiful idea of irony. What Haman thought was going to be for his good now turns out he's going to be hung on it. Yeah. Right. It's funny. Now, I didn't mention this before when it mentioned the eunuch idea. I think we should mention it here.
Okay.
The idea of a eunuch, now the earlier time, it was the eunuch that guarded all the queens, the wives of the king, or even concubines of the king. So that means that's a good reason why they'd be eunuchs, because that would take away any possibility that there'd ever be any problem with that. Right. I don't know this Harbona. It says he's one of the king's officials, I assume. Whether he needed to have that same kind of problem, make sure that issue didn't happen or not. But so this one is less clear. The other one was real clear why he was going to be a eunuch. So on this one, it's possible that the Persian Empire just made sure that anybody in the in the palace area could not get in trouble, and maybe that's what was going on here. So, All right. In chapters 8 and 9, because this law was made according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, our understanding is that can't be altered. So they can add to it, but they can't change it. Okay, and Haman knew that. That's part of the reason why he wanted it to be done according to the law of the Medes and the Persians. So this would then be, you couldn't change it. This is going to be a guarantee. So what they do is they add to it. Okay. So in chapter 8, verse 5, it says, then she said, if it pleases the king, and if I found favor before him, and the matter seems proper to the king, and I am pleased in his sight, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who were in the king's province. Now you write to the Jews as you see fit in the king's name, and seal it in the king's signet ring for a decree that is written in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's signet ring so it may not be revoked. I didn't take the verse that says actually what's going to happen is they're going to be able to defend themselves. Now that kind of surprises me too. So if I'm in the Persian Empire and I'm told I'm supposed to destroy the Jews and so I can kill anybody there, if I find out that another law comes out that says but they can defend themselves, I'm going, why would I ever go against the Jews then? I mean, it's just going to be a civil war. And so it seems like to me the only ones that probably would have done this would have been the ones that really did have something against the Jews or didn't really like them and wanted them.
Yeah, because there's going to be a cost.
Yeah. So I thought, well, that's interesting. So they still continued to fight, even though they knew there was going to be a judgment for, they were going to have a cost, like you say, a cost. So.
Yeah.
Verses in chapter 8, verses 10 through 12, it says, he wrote the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring. Now, the king's signet ring would basically be a seal that would authorize that this came from the king. Okay, so it's very clear. And he sent letters by the couriers of the horses riding on steeds sired by the royal stud. That would mean that these are probably the best horses in all the kingdom. Mm-hmm. So that's probably what's going on. In them, the king granted the Jews who were in each and every city the right to assemble and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and annihilate the entire army of any people or province which might attack them, including children and women, and to plunder their spoil. On one day in all the province of the king Ahasuerus, the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. Now, so the very day they were going to be punished or killed, now they're going to be able to defend themselves and go after. And it does sound like, and that this is where I think, these people must have really hated the Jews, because now the Jews can defend themselves and not only kill them, but kill their family and take all their spoils. Right. So, I mean, you'd have to really have an anger towards them to actually do this, it would seem like. So, all right. Then because they did such a, because it spared the Jews, they had what's called the Feast of Purim, which means lots. Remember, that's how they determined what the day was going to be. So, so that's how this worked out. Verse 20 and 20 to 22 say, then Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews who were in the province of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, obliging them to celebrate the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the same month annually. Oh, because what had happened is that they didn't get enough killed, I guess, on the first day. So they actually let it go to the second day. Yeah, sorry about that. Because on those days, the Jews rid themselves of their enemies.
Wow.
And my guess is, this is like civil war in an empire. And it kind of amazes me that King Ahasuerus allowed this to happen. But it was to the point where I'm not sure there was much that he could do about it, because actually they're going to be killed if they don't fight back. And so the very thing that would at least protect them anyway. Verse 26 says, therefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur, which means lot. And because the instructions of this letter, both that they had seen in this regard and what had happened to them. So there's a celebration, and the celebration makes sense. Here's a celebration that's going to have God's people being spared. And so, so I can see why they would definitely celebrate that.
It's worthy of celebrating.
Yeah. Then chapter 10 emphasizes Mordecai's greatness. And this is kind of interesting. So he gets the place of Haman. Now, remember, Haman was basically second in command. Right. Now Mordecai gets that. And not only that, he gets all his houses and property and all that stuff too. Yeah. It also, but it sounds like it also goes further. Here's what it says. He gained favor with many. He sought the good of his people and spoke for the welfare of the whole nation. So he didn't just speak for Jews. He spoke for everybody. Verse 3 says, for Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and in favor with many of his kinsmen, one who sought the good of his people, and the one who spoke for the welfare of his whole nation. So he not only spoke good for the Jews, but all of the nations. Now, I probably should have made that the key verse, shouldn't I? Because that's basically what this whole book's about, isn't it? God sparing his people and then making it so they didn't have to worry. Because remember, it says that they wiped out all their enemies. So now God's got them protected in the Persian Empire, miles away from home, but they're still honored in their kingdom. So I probably should have made that the key verse, because that's actually pretty good.
It is a really good verse. I mean, it's I mean, in especially in this talk of like irony, that does kind of make a lot of sense, right? Because this is like the conclusion of this kind of all these, reverses and back and forths we've had. Like now you have, you can kind of see God's plan at work.
Yeah.
From moving kind of from the bottom to the top. All these things kind of fall into that.
Yeah, I didn't even put that as one of them, but you're right. It's kind of crucial to the whole book, isn't it? Here's some of the irony. Haman wants to kill Mordecai, and the king wants to bless him or honor him. Haman thinks he's blessed by being asked to come to Esther's banquet while she wants him punished. And then 3, Haman is hung on his own gallows meant for Mordecai. Those are just amazing turns of events and that's
even in the third one, that's like, the biggest thing that happens, of course, is the death, but his wife, reveals another bit kind of inside of that of like, you're going to fall down before Mordecai. Yeah. Like this whole thing started because Mordecai wouldn't bow before Haman. Yeah. And then it's like, you're going to fall before him. You'll be on your knees before him. It is. It's very interesting how that works out.
That's great. Okay. All right. Conclusion. It was very difficult for the Israelites returning to the land, and they had much opposition. We already knew that from several of the books before. But God is still protecting them and taking care of them. Even though they're in a foreign nation, they're still being protected. Yeah. This story would have been very encouraging for the Jews and would have given them hope in a very, very dark time. So I think that makes some sense. All right. Are you ready for some questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Why does God seem to be undercover in this book?
It's interesting. I think I might get to this answer by kind of approaching it in a different way. Okay. It does seem like God is undercover in this book, but also it's very evident. There's lots of things that seem to happen that if it's not God, it would just be lucky. Yeah. Everything kind of works out,
That's all right.
Even from like the lots that that Haman cast that kind of determine the length of time that but between when he's going to kind of enact his plan. All these things. So I guess the question of why is he undercover in this book? I'm not totally sure, but it does seem very evident that he's working in this book.
Right. I think part of the reason is because this is how we're going to see real life. This seems like to me, this is real life. This is how history works. We no longer have the prophets telling us when God's hand is doing something. This book is kind of an example of what it's like now in the Persian Empire, now that the prophets are not telling us exactly what God's doing in all these things. This is how we're going to have to live our lives. We're going to have to look at what is happening there and know that God's been behind it, even though he's not clearly stated. And I think that's kind of neat because it sets kind of the groundwork for now the rest of the biblical text. That's the way God's going to work from then on. So I think that's kind of, if you see it like that, that's kind of interesting and important how this book works its way out.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is this book still revelation from God?
Yeah, I think so. What would the opposite of that be? Because it doesn't mention God, it's not revelation. It's just some kind of side story.
Yeah, just kind of a history like that here's some happened to some Jews in Persia.
Right. No, I think it is. I think it's still revelation from God. And I mean, I would kind of, my first instinct would be to kind of lean on church history, I think, for this, and that it's been recognized, kind of canonically as, a part of the Bible and having, fitting in with the rest of the text. And I mean, as you know, I'm in a program here at Gateway Seminary, and I wrote a paper recently about Andrew Fuller and John Bunyan both reference the book of Esther as a very important book in their conversions. And it's fascinating because you wouldn't necessarily think that, but they were both kind of for different reasons, or maybe in different contexts. They were both very moved by Esther approaching the king in an act of faith. It's kind of this they feel like this is they were reading Esther as saying this is a dangerous thing. Yeah. But because Esther approached the king, and I have this in the Bible, and this is an example of someone doing good, I can approach God even though I have no warrant to, I have no right to, and I, deserve death and punishment, I can approach him and kind of beg for mercy, and that will turn out good. So
that's great.
There's this interesting, I know it's really fascinating, and it's not something I probably would have on my own picked up necessarily reading the book of Esther, but that's so cool to see how a book like this that maybe doesn't seem like it fits as well can still be so important in the life of a Christian.
Yeah. And for the nation of Israel, I can see how this is actually crucial for them. See, they're at a time when they're wondering, is God going to protect us? We're in the Persian Empire. We see pagan people everywhere. And God's just letting us be, taken over by this other nation. And here's a clear example where God says, no way, I'm still protecting you. Hang on, I'm there. Yeah. So I see this as real crucial to how the book develops even. Yeah. All right. And then what's the purpose for Esther? Well,
kind of like you just said, I think, really. I mean, it's in, certainly, in the time that it was written, I think it would have been an encouragement and kind of an acknowledgement that God is still working, even though maybe it's sometimes hard to see or hard to recognize in the moment, but that God is still protecting his people, and that his people should still, be dependent on him.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. One more. Why is the book written in the way it was with these reversals and irony?
I was thinking about this just a minute ago. There's this idea that the Gospels don't always just say, Jesus is God, Jesus is the Son of God. But there's always these things that happen where he does something amazing. And then people are like, who is this?
Yeah.
Who is this guy?
Yeah, that even the waves obey him, or the winds.
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so these things happen and people recognize there's something special about Jesus. So why doesn't the text just say that? Yeah. Well, Dr. Gertner's answer is that this is written to the church, and they probably already had Paul's letters. This is very early in the church's history, and they know who it is. And so it's kind of this leading question, who is it? And the people can answer, the readers can answer, well, I know how that happened. I know who Jesus is. Yeah. I kind of wonder if maybe it's a little bit of the same thing with this. You have these these ironic structures built in. When you really look at it, especially look at the whole book, they're pretty obvious, all these reversals and how this is happening. And so how do you explain that? Yeah. Are they just lucky? Is this some kind of disembodied fate or something? Or is this God working things out in a way? Yeah. It kind of proves God's hand is on all this without saying it.
Good. And remember, they're in a Persian empire, so this is going to highlight now their God. When they see all these gods doing this, and they don't see any of any images of their God, because God told them not to do that, they're going to see behind these events this God that's more powerful than any of the gods that these Persians are serving. Yeah. So I actually think it creates interest. I mean, this is a brilliant story. Sure. And then you've got to...
very well constructed.
Yeah. And at the end of the book, you've got to ask, was this all by coincidence, or is there a God behind this? I mean, it just almost forces you to ask that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Well, we made it. That's the book of Esther.
Yeah. This is a good one.
Yeah. Perfect. I think it's really so interesting. And the way it's put together is just a brilliant, and the encouragement that it would have provided for the Israelites at this time. It's just amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was a good one. It's a great read.
So next we'll be doing Job, which is a very interesting book also. So
yeah, it is. And it's got some complicated stuff in it. It's a little bit of a longer book. Yeah. But I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, me too. But thank you, Tyler.
Okay, I'll see you next week.
Okay, thanks.